personally, like I'm coming from the cybersecurity space, and actually when we walked into this problem, which is just basically a fintech problem, you need to start using, I think, a new terminology, which is much more of a financial terminology, right? So the simplest way to think about consumer protection is like two things. One, I put my money or my value into those assets on this new technology. I go to sleep, I wake up in the morning, I need to make sure that they are still there, right? So fundamentally, to protect it against theft, when I'm sending a transaction to you, I need to make sure that it's not being phished or spoofed. And the interesting thing is that it's like a very new set of problems compared to the way that the traditional financial ecosystem works. And
Michael Shaulov, welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. I'm so happy to have you here. Obviously, it's such a crazy world that we're living in. You're living and leading one of the most, I think, important and amazing, changes that are fundamentally changing the way we're interacting with assets and with what we consider as tools that help us engage in this world. And so really excited to be speaking to you both about this problem space, where this is heading, but also your own personal journey. So thank you very much for being here.
of course, thanks, Michael, for having me again.
Of course, and definitely. So Michael, let's get into digital assets. Give me a little bit of an overview as to, what is this, even the space that we're talking about, and how did you get really into this space?
Yeah, sure. So I think the easiest way to think about it that this is once in a century, sort of almost a transformation of the backbone and the plumbing of the financial system, right? And this is like, actually the usage of public blockchains, what we in our own world calling like, the crypto rails, and the transformation and the implications it has for the worldwide economy. And I think, and probably like a lot of future implications around how, financial assets, other assets, and just generally speaking, things that we value, right? Just like basic value can actually be transported and interacted over the internet. And the simplest way to understand this is that when I tell people like, okay, if you want to browse to a Japanese website, right? So let's say you're in the US, you're in Israel, or you're anywhere else in the world, and you want to go into a Japanese website, you basically type something in your web browser, .jp, takes less than a second to load on your website. You don't pay anything to anyone, right? There's just like a few bits that are going from that part of the world to your part of the world in the speed of light, right? Now, if you want to send $200 to Japan, that will take you anywhere between 3 days and a week, right? And it will cost you anywhere between $50 to $120, depending on the setup that you have with your bank, right? And or 3%, right? If you're doing the transaction over a credit card. And then you should ask yourself a question, okay, but why is that the issue? Because even when I'm transferring money right now, this is just like a bunch of bits that are going from one database to a different database, right? That's the only thing that is happening, right? You're not basically shipping an envelope with dollars in it. And the reason for that is that the entire system is basically, at best, what was set up in the 70s, predates the internet. And a lot of like the ideas are actually like even older, and they go about like 100 to 500 years ago. And that's how the financial system really works, right? And all the innovation, all the fintechs that happened over the last couple of decades, they only sort of like patches on top of that infrastructure. And the interesting thing about blockchain, and the first thing that actually came in terms of the innovation scale, like Bitcoin, which was like the revolutionary idea, was that you have a system in which you can natively transfer value over the internet at the speed of the internet without any intermediaries, without relying on a set or a linkage of underlying financial institutions and banks. And that was like transformative. And this entire notion has huge implications on how the financial system is going to look moving forward. And that has implications to anyone from like, if you want to send or pay $5, right, to the other side of the world, to government funding, treasuries, bonds, capital markets, and even other areas that are currently not considered like financial activity. For example, in-game economy, when you're buying a virtual good in your favorite online game, all those things can actually be built together. And this is, I think, the really exciting part that we are in.
And so there's incredible upsides to engaging in this digital transformation. You're touching on the most fundamental ones, I think, which are talking about our ability to engage in trade and in transfers, both in terms of latency, but also in terms of not losing and not paying for the transactions, just like we're not paying to browse websites in general. But there's obviously mountains in the way to get us to translate our existing financial systems to this new financial system. And at Fireblocks, I understand you're tackling and you're helping mitigate a big mountain in the way in the world of security. But what are those big pillars that we are climbing over these years to get us to that new world?
Yeah, so I think the first um, mountain that was standing in between us and actually that future was really, is this technology real? Can you actually put it in practice? And luckily, I think over the last decade and probably in the last 3-4 years, that mountain was cleared, right? So we have real companies doing billions of dollars of transfers and actually like sort of like reaping the benefits. A lot of them are sitting on the Fireblocks infrastructure and reaping the benefits for their new business model. That was like a big mountain, just basically the validation of the technology and it can actually be used at scale. The second component, and maybe like the second two components that almost like go hand in hand, is basically security, compliance, and just generally speaking, consumer protection, right? So um, personally like I'm coming from the cybersecurity space, and actually when we walked into this problem, which is just basically a fintech problem, you need to start using, I think, a new terminology, which is much more of a financial terminology, right? So the simplest way to think about consumer protection is like two things. One, I put my money or my value into those assets on this new technology. I go to sleep, I wake up in the morning, I need to make sure that they are still there, right? So fundamentally, to protect it against theft, when I'm sending a transaction to you, I need to make sure that it's not being phished or spoofed. And the the interesting thing is that it's like a very new set of problems compared to the way that the traditional financial ecosystem works, and we'll go get into that in a second. And the second issue is really things that are much more around consumer protection and compliance, which is like more around the fact like how do we making sure that there are no bad actors, right? How do we making sure that this is not being used or leveraged for terrorist financing or for um, human trafficking or things that are like very clear to all of us that there are bad things that we don't want to facilitate. How do we making sure that when you're buying an asset, this is actually like what is being marketed to you is real. So all like those two mountains are, generally speaking, the two mountains that um, regulators and most of the market, most of the people that want to use it care about, and those are the issues that we are tackling. And then on top of that, like once we clear those two mountains, which I think we have done quite successfully so far, there is just basically the general adoption, right? So how easy it is to use, how easy it is for newcomers to adopt this technology, and how easy it is for incumbents and what we call traditional financial institutions to start using the technology. But the answer for both of us is actually like regulation, which we had a lot of movement over there recently. But what the regulators really care about is that there is a consumer protection, that people are not getting hurt while we adopting new technology. And that, by the way, like it's true. We're seeing it with the internet, we're seeing it with blockchain, we're seeing it with AI. This is just like a common issue across everything that is new tech right now.
And what are the big milestones we've had with regulations that, very recently, that are now allowing us to increase that adoption even more and to engage more with consumers in the space?
Yeah, so I think the thing that is basically most known that happened in the last month actually is the approval of the ETFs, right, in the United States by the Security and Exchange Commission, and basically 11 ETFs going live and now available for the market to trade through the stock exchange. To be honest, there are like a lot of debates of like how much is that an important milestone for the blockchain itself, because in some ways, this is just like a very traditional way to access a very new technology, and you can access that technology directly, right? So why do you need the banks to access that? But from a regulatory standpoint, that was a huge milestone and something that the ecosystem and the players in the ecosystem were fighting for the last 5 6 years. And in order to clear that, they had to prove to the regulators that you can actually establish guardrails, remove market manipulation, establish consumer protection, that the custody and the security of the underlying storage of those bitcoins that are backing the ETF are sound and secure. And the standard of the Security and Exchange Commission is very, very high. And that was basically, we were going back and forth in terms of trying to get this thing approved for the last 4 or 5 years. And now we already managed to clear this, which basically means that um, assuming that you implement things correctly, you can actually get to the point where the top regulators in the world believe that, okay, it's sound enough to be used by the mainstream.
And it sounds like this is an important milestone, again, not in terms of the access, right, but more so in terms of the validation to transition from the early adopters to the rest of the world, right, the long tail that are perhaps looking at this more at this validation as well. So I can assume why it is an important fight nevertheless. um, does this have any impact on volume of trade, or do you anticipate that this is more so the second order effects of this, of allowing more people to get comfortable with engaging with this?
Well, I think that it has three pillars, right? So the first pillar is definitely the direct volume and trading expectation. So for those who are listening here, the launch of the Bitcoin ETF, for example, by BlackRock, that is the biggest asset manager in the world, that was in the first 3 days. That was the highest volume that they ever had for any ETF, more than gold, more than silver, more than any composition that they ever launched. The Bitcoin ETF had a subscription that in the first couple of days that exceeded any other product that they ever launched, right? So first and foremost, it basically shows that there is a demand and clearly drives volume. The second effect is that it drives it actually sort of like almost like a psychological barrier that was removed as people saw, okay, the top Wall Street regulator is stepping in. By the way, in an environment that is still reasonably hostile, okay, for this market, just to be quite clear. And the third, which I think is goes to much broader than Bitcoin, is that we always look at like the U.S. regulators, but actually this is a global phenomenon, and we're seeing globally, both in Europe and in the UAE, in Japan, in Singapore, in a lot of other jurisdictions, the Australia, the regulators are actually, and by the way, also like in Israel, the regulators are actually moving forward much faster than in the United States. They establishing much cleaner and forward-looking standards, and that enables all the other beautiful use cases that we're actually seeing being built on that, which really goes into the mainstream, right? So it's not only a question like, do I want to trade Bitcoin? Do I think that this is going to the moon or not? It's really like, can I use a payment system to do remittance and transfer a payment to the Philippines or to Africa or cross border at a fraction of the cost and at a speed and transparency that I couldn't before? Do I have the tools? Do we know how to construct assets that are on chain, that are, for example, one-to-one pegged to the dollar, pegged to the euro, or pegged to the Japanese yen? They are not volatile like Bitcoin. are we able to basically create treasury, basically like treasury market or bonds that when I don't want to use the money, I can instantly basically go into an instrument that is going to pay me 5% for every day, 5% like per year, but like in an interval of minutes, which is currently not available in the traditional space. Because in the traditional space, if I want to buy a money market fund or I need to invest in any other product, the settlement time is next day or like over the weekend, right? So you're basically able to capture a lot of value, and all those things are basically being built on top of that regulation.
Incredible. Okay, so where are you at with this? So you're coming from the security space. You sold your previous startup to Checkpoint, and you were head of product and of some of the most important products within Checkpoint. When you were coming across this space, how did you end up starting Fireblocks?
Yeah, so it's actually started like somewhat like from a first principles standpoint. And when I was at Checkpoint, as you mentioned, our previous company Lacoon was specialized in mobile security. We got acquired by Checkpoint, and I was leading their product team for mobile and cloud at the time. And at some point, we did a small part in an investigation that happened in South Korea. So basically, the Lazarus Group, which is affiliated, attributed to the North Korean, they hacked into 4 cryptocurrency exchanges in 2016, 2017, and they stole what was at the time $200 million worth of Bitcoin. By the way, Bitcoin was at $1,000. So I think you can multiply that by 43, and that's the actual value of that right now. And I was just blown away. And the two issues that actually came up very quickly, speaking of first principles, is that it was once you kind of read the Bitcoin white paper and the Ethereum white paper, you sort of understood that this is um, an extremely important and revolutionary underlying technology, at the minimum for the financial markets. So for someone who's been watching the transformation of public cloud, in terms of what it did to the IT, I kind of saw how one piece of infrastructure has been completely disrupted, right? And I was like, oh my God, this is actually going to disrupt a much bigger piece of infrastructure, right? So, if you think about companies, for someone who comes from the cybersecurity space, you know two things. One is that the financial space is orders of magnitude bigger than like from a TAM or from a market cap than all of cybersecurity and IT, right? So Visa alone has a market cap that exceeds all the cybersecurity companies combined, I think. And so the opportunity is big. The second aspect is that, by the way, for most of the cybersecurity companies, 40% of their revenue coming from the financial sector. Understandably, why, and that's basically a big opportunity. So you're basically saying there is a big problem over there. This is like a really large TAM, and this is going to be as transformative, probably like bigger, much more transformative than the previous kind of like examples. So we th- that was like an interesting opportunity. So what we started to do then is actually follow a playbook that I recommend to all the entrepreneurs, right? Which is taking from a book called Four Steps to Epiphany, and it's called like customer discovery. So we didn't came from the space of blockchain. So we started doing this kind of market research and just talking with clients and trying to prospects actually, and trying to understand what are the pain points they have, what is not working, what are the gaps, why are they getting hacked, right? And why do they keep losing money? And that basically what established Fireblocks, that initially was somewhat of a, I would say we had somewhat of a limited view in terms of what we're going to do, but very quickly it has expanded to be this pretty broad infrastructure platform play for any company, financial institution, and non-financial institution that are accessing digital assets and cryptocurrencies, and we're basically providing them the entire backbone of wallets, settlement capabilities, tokenization capabilities, payment capabilities. So 5 years later, it is a true platform play that we are able to provide to all those clients.
Incredible. So, and Fireblocks is obviously one of the most well-known companies in the space. Well, what is the current status of Fireblocks in the market?
Yeah, so I think that we are definitely kind of charging forward with the market. We are seeing, broadly speaking, especially after the ETF approval, but even before that, let's put it this way: the end of 2022 with the collapse of FTX wasn't like a pretty sight, to anyone who've been in the space. Having said that, all the people that were in the space, they stayed, and we kind of rebuilt a lot of the damage that was done. So the second part of 2023 was quite helpful. We started to see a lot of extended utility use cases, extended players coming in. The regulation started to improve. So right now, we're definitely seeing the macro for the space continuously improving. Our stage right now that we are working with over 1,500 clients. All of them are businesses, financial institutions. Our goal is to basically double or triple it this year on the back of a lot of new people that are coming in. We've done over, I think it's now approaching it's way over $4 trillion, I think approaching $5 trillion that is moving through our infrastructure. So our mission this year is to do two things. One, and continue to support and enable more and more use cases that help people to leverage this technology, and to help regulators to shape the regulation and basically continue and solve issues around security, around consumer protection, around compliance that they need, which we were doing quite well by expanding our portfolio. And last but not least, to start pushing forward a lot of the things which we believe are kind of the future of where the space is going, which we're kind of in a unique position to do that.
Incredible, Michael. Thank you so much for taking the time to come here. This is I'm time capsuling this conversation just like I did with the other one. It's such a special moment to be talking to somebody who's charging with the industry and leading it, and so I'm very, very excited to continue cheering on and being a fan from the side. And thank you for taking the time to share this with myself and everybody else that's listening. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Michael.